Cardi B just had to eat humble pie in the most public way possible, and let's be real, it wasn't pretty. She went off on someone who had absolutely nothing to do with her beef, dragged their name through the dirt repeatedly, and then had to backtrack with an apology when the backlash hit. But here's where it gets interesting. The apology came with the designer bag offer, a whole lot of respect talk, and what seemed like genuine remorse. Except the person on the receiving end, they're not buying it. At least that's what it looks like based on what happened next. We're talking about calculated shade, strategic responses, and a situation where an apology might have made things worse instead of better. Cardi thought she could smooth this over with some kind words and an expensive gift, but she's learning that some disrespect can't be erased that easily. The response she got back was cold, subtle, and packed with messages that everyone caught, except maybe Cardi herself. This isn't just about two rappers having a moment. This is about power, respect, and what happens when you drag someone into drama they never asked for. Between uncomfortable performances, pointed comments about other rappers, and fans dissecting every word, this situation is messier than it looks on the surface. And with everything else Cardi's dealing with right now, this was the last thing she needed.
So let's rewind and talk about how this whole mess started, because it had nothing to do with initially. Cardi was heated about something involving Ice Spice and her manager. The details of that beef don't even matter as much as what Cardi decided to do during her rant. She was going off, making threats, talking about how she was going to handle the situation, and then she kept bringing up Latto's name. Not once, not twice, but repeatedly throughout the entire rant. She kept saying she's not Latto, emphasizing that Latto was too scared to stand up for herself in similar situations. She called Latto the P word multiple times, basically painting her as someone who backs down from conflict and doesn't have the spine to handle beef. The way Cardi kept circling back to Latto's name made it clear this wasn't just a passing mention. She was using Latto as her example of everything she wasn't gonna be. The comparison was deliberate and cutting, especially because it was so public. This wasn't a private conversation that leaked. This was Cardi on a rant that she knew people would hear, and she chose to drag Latto into it anyway. The disrespect wasn't subtle either. Calling someone scary and weak in the middle of a heated moment is one thing, but doing it repeatedly while they're minding their own business, that's a whole different level.
And here's what makes this situation even more foul. Latto genuinely had nothing to do with the Ice Spice situation. She wasn't involved in whatever beef was happening. She hadn't said anything about Cardi, and she was staying in her own lane. But Cardi decided to use her as a punching bag anyway to make a point about someone else entirely. That's where a lot of people started having issues with what went down. If you have beef with Ice Spice or her manager, handle that directly. Why are you bringing a completely different artist into the conversation just to tear them down? It made Cardi look like she was reaching for examples to make herself look tougher, and Latto just happened to be the convenient target. Some people speculated that there might be underlying tension between them that nobody knew about, but even if that's true, this wasn't the way to address it. Publicly calling someone out during a rant about someone else entirely is messy and unnecessary. And the fact that Cardi kept going back to it, kept emphasizing how she wasn't like Latto, made it feel personal even if it wasn't supposed to be. Latto got hit with stray bullets that turned into direct shots, and she didn't even see it coming because she wasn't involved in the original conflict.
So, the audio of Cardi's rant leaked and spread everywhere. People were talking about it, dissecting what she said, and a lot of folks started calling out how unfair it was to Latto. That's when Cardi realized she probably went too far. She came out with a public apology that hit all the right notes on the surface. She said she was running hot in the moment, that she respects Latto heavily, and that she respects everything about her, including her team. Then she took it a step further and said she wasn't too proud to apologize publicly, and that she was going to privately buy Latto a designer bag to make up for it. On paper, that sounds like a genuine apology. She acknowledged she was wrong, she praised Latto, and she offered to make amends with an expensive gesture. But a lot of people weren't convinced.
The timing felt off, like this was more about damage control than actual remorse. Cardi had spent that entire rant using Latto as an example of weakness, calling her names and tearing her down to build herself up. Then, after the backlash started rolling in and people started defending Latto, suddenly there's an apology. It felt reactionary rather than genuine, like Cardi was trying to clean up her image instead of actually feeling bad about what she said. And the way the apology was phrased raised some eyebrows too. She said she respects Latto and her team, but she never actually explained why she felt the need to bring Latto into the situation in the first place. There was no accountability for dragging someone uninvolved into her beef, just an acknowledgement that she went too far in the heat of the moment.
Now, Latto's response to all this is where things get really interesting, because she didn't respond the way people expected. She didn't come out with a statement accepting the apology. She didn't post on social media thanking Cardi or saying they're good. Instead, she stayed quiet on that front and let her actions do the talking. Shortly after the apology went public, Latto had a performance scheduled, and during that performance, she kept screaming the P word over and over again, the same word Cardi had used to describe her. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Fans immediately started connecting the dots and asked if this was Latto's way of responding without directly responding. Was she reclaiming the word? Was she throwing shade back at Cardi? Or was this just part of her regular performance that happened to line up with unfortunate timing? Most people lean toward the shade interpretation, especially because of how deliberately she emphasized it during the show. It felt like a message, a way of saying she heard what Cardi said and she's not just rolling over and accepting it. Then, things got even more layered when Latto did an interview shortly after and was asked about Nicki Minaj. Her response was interesting. She says she's willing to rekindle any relationship, and when specifically asked about Nicki, she says she used to love her. Used to. Past tense. People caught that immediately and started speculating about what it meant. Why is she talking about Nicki in past tense right now in the middle of drama with Cardi when everyone knows Cardi and Nicki have been beefing for years? It felt like another layer of calculated shade, a subtle way of positioning herself and making it clear that her loyalty isn't automatically with Cardi just because of an apology.
But here's where the power dynamics come into play and why Latto's response makes sense strategically. Some people think Latto didn't go harder at Cardi because she's scared of her or doesn't want the smoke, but there's another interpretation that's probably more accurate. Latto allegedly wants to go on tour with Cardi at some point in the future. That's a huge opportunity for her career, and publicly beefing with Cardi would destroy any chance of that happening. So instead of firing back directly and starting a full war, Latto's being calculated. She's throwing subtle shade with the performance and the Nicki comments, letting people know she's not just accepting disrespect without question, but she's not burning bridges completely either. That's actually a smart move in the industry, especially for someone who's still building their career and doesn't have Cardi's level of influence yet. Going head-to-head with Cardi could damage Latto's reputation, cost her opportunities, and potentially isolate her from other collaborations. So she's walking a fine line, showing she has a backbone without starting something that could hurt her in the long run. The performance where she kept saying the P word was enough to send a message without declaring war. The Nicki Minaj comments added another layer, showing that Latto has options and isn't locked into being on Cardi's side just because she got an apology and a bag offer. It's strategic, it's calculated, and it's the kind of response that flies under the radar for people who aren't paying close attention, but hits hard for those who are.
So, where does all this leave us? Cardi's dealing with a situation that could have completely avoided if she hadn't dragged someone uninvolved into her Ice Spice drama. The apology might have checked all the boxes publicly, but the response she got back shows that Latto's not fully convinced, or at least not willing to let it slide without some subtle pushback. And this is all happening while Cardi's navigating a bunch of other chaos in her personal life. She's heavily pregnant, going through a messy divorce with Offset, and recently had that awkward encounter with one of his baby mamas at a club that left her visibly uncomfortable. Everything seems to be hitting her at once, and the Latto situation was just another unnecessary complication that she created herself. The industry's watching how this plays out because it says a lot about respect and power dynamics. Can you drag someone's name through the mud and then smooth it over with an apology and some money? Or does that disrespect leave a mark that doesn't just disappear because you said sorry? Latto's response suggests it's the latter. She's not starting a war, but she's also not pretending everything is fine just because Cardi apologized. The subtle shade, the strategic comments about Nicki, the performance choices, all of it points to someone who's not letting disrespect slide, even if she's not addressing it head on. Whether the situation eventually blows over or turns into something bigger remains to be seen. But one thing is clear. Cardi learned that you can't just use people as examples in your rants and expect them to accept an apology without consequence. Respect goes both ways, and Latto just showed everyone that she's not going to be treated as the scared, weak example Cardi tried to paint her as. The apology happened, the bag might get bought, but the respect, that's still being negotiated.